Cool. Before I get going, a couple of things to keep in mind. If you want the slides, connect with me on LinkedIn. Send a message when you connect, like add a note, or just message me afterwards. There's a lot of stuff in here. It might help in future projects. Also, I'm going to be recording this, but this it's going to be used kind of for different purposes within marketing, but it's not at all affiliated with either schools. I have to make sure that I say that so that nobody gets concerned that I'm, I don't know, piggybacking on some school. So there's a lot to cover. I would say you're probably going to get a different perspective from innovation in general from me. I have a unique presenting style, so hopefully that, that doesn't throw you off too much. A lot to cover, and yeah, I'm just going to kind of run through a little bit about me so you have a good idea of what I'm all about. So up until this past Thursday, so about a week and a few days ago, I got fired from a company called Valuer.ai. Super recent, right? Yeah, fuck those guys. But, it's one of those things. It was a really exciting experience because it gave me, I would say, a unique opportunity to kind of peer behind the curtain of what happens within corporate innovation. A lot of the shortcomings that are happening there from somebody that has co-founded 6 different startups. Also, one of the nice things that comes from that is I work 7 days a week. That's probably the American in me. It's kind of part of my jam. I teach growth hacking over at Talent Garden and a bunch of other places, and have basically leveraged my teaching in order to get a free office. So on Saturdays for a little bit of time, a few hours, and all day on Sunday, I'm cracking over there, and usually after work 1 or 2 days a week, and then at home. So I work a lot, but it's fun. I dig what I do, and hopefully that comes off during my presentation. I think you'll get a feel for kind of where I come from and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's that. I've co-founded 6 different startups over the last 12 years. It's been everything from gluten-free VIP, terrible name, terrible idea. It was essentially supplying food allergies, finding foods for people that have food allergies. One of the biggest things that we learned from that was it's really important to do user testing. And that's part of what we're working with you guys to do in terms of actually getting a chance to meet some of the people in the market and bring them forward. From that all the way over to a million different things. I'll go into some of the stuff maybe later if it makes sense. I do a ton of lecturing on startups, innovation, ton of growth hacking stuff, KU, CBS, ITU, DTU, Google, Talent Garden, you name it. I basically have done it in this town. I don't know, did anybody here go to Tech Festival or Tech Barbecue? No? Okay, one person. It's actually a lot of fucking fun. I don't know why you guys don't go. And I think CPH Business had free tickets, so go figure. I think I've kind of covered myself enough. So these are some of the projects that I'm currently working on. ArchitectureQuote is kind of like prime time, and that's my focus. Clinton Marketing is now what I'm leveraging to kind of continue to fuel money. I don't really want to take angel investment because they're asking for way too much equity, and it's bullshit, especially out in Denmark. In terms of Talent Garden, I'm teaching a lot of the stuff over there, and I think, fingers crossed, I'll be doing a session with Pfizer over the next couple of weeks. And TaylorRyan.io is for all my speaking engagements and stuff that I do at different events. Basically, tomorrow I'm doing my growth hacking masterclass. Then I'm over at Search Stars in Malmö, and then next week I have 3 events as well. So I dig this shit. It's a ton of fun, and hopefully that comes off in that way. Little fun fact, I was on a reality show before I really got settled into Denmark. So about a year in, they have this show on the Home and Garden channel. So it's not a dating show for those that aren't familiar with this kind of stuff. This is like an old people show. It's about basically Americans that move internationally. And you'd be surprised what they can do with a little bit of clever editing. So they made me look like a total douche. So if you look it up, Taylor Ryan or Copenhagen House Hunters International on YouTube, there's a good laugh for you there. So my goal for today is to provide value. I want to give you guys something in the way of a different perspective on innovation. It's not all positive, and I think it's a bit more transparent than maybe what some of the professors might show you in class. Stefan brought a bunch of students over, I guess it was 6 months ago or something. It was a while back. And I don't know, maybe they were jet lagged. I couldn't tell if this was for them. But
lack of brains, I think.
But yeah, it was one of those things. I definitely want to bring something that you guys can either use in class or at the very least make you think. So I have a pretty good understanding of why you're here. I don't think I really need to dive into that, but I am curious, how many people here have internships in startups? Nobody. One person. Nobody else is interning in a startup? Damn. All right. Yeah, if you're looking for internships, holler at your boy, or yeah, I don't know. It's like the best way to get involved with a company on the ground level. Like, I would definitely consider doing that. Okay, so yeah, this is where I kind of go into the presentation. I want to touch upon a number of areas where innovation is failing. And by the way, it is kind of a big bullshit bingo buzzword. Like, it doesn't really mean anything. Innovation means everything and nothing at once. So one of the things that I peeled out of this really interesting guy, John Chambers, was essentially his understanding of where these large companies are going. So if you look at the way Fortune 500 companies have stuck around over the last 60 years on the list, it used to be the average amount of time they would spend on there is about 33 years. Now we're closer to 11 years within the last decade. And the idea is 40% of Fortune 500 companies that don't partner with startups will become irrelevant in the next 10 years. The idea is that a lot of these big players are missing talent because they end up scaling a long time ago and keeping the wrong people in the right place for too long. They're basically being disrupted. And that's a big part of what ArchitectureQuote is trying to do. But I think you'll see this across a number of industries. You have a lot of small, agile, clever startups that are basically changing the way that either customers shop or people go about using a product, service, or a solution. And bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a motherfucker, and I can't wait to go into that one because it screws everybody up. Right? There's a million different examples worldwide of bureaucracy within governments, certainly within large companies. And I think that is one of the biggest inhibitors, or the things that stop large companies from going onwards. The idea of doing, again, this right thing for too long. Culture is definitely a big part of it. And you better believe the people of age in this group, what is everybody, like average of like 23, 24-ish? Something like that? Yeah. They have no fucking clue how to like manage anybody in this room. So like that's going to be exciting. Because the problem is I'm sort of almost part of your generation, almost. Are you guys technically Generation Z or still millennials? Millennials? Millennials, hands up. Yeah, okay. Generation Z, how many people don't know? That's like fucking weird. All right, cool. So I have a feeling that you don't realize how difficult it is to manage somebody in your position, and there's a number of reasons for that. And the last thing that I really want to go into is that a lot of these folks are revenue focused and not necessarily revenue focused in the long term. It's the immediate. I want to basically make $1 today to lose out on $1,000 in a month. And I'm going to show some of the different examples of that and how this all works. So talent. So I know you can't see that. It's super small, but if you get the slides and get a fucking magnifying glass on it, you can actually get in there and see it. So this is basically a listing of the average pay of top talent, medium employee pay, 2017, but 2 years ago. Come on, let's be honest. You have Facebook, Alphabet, which is Google, Netflix, and so on. None of the companies that are listed in there are some of the large big four, so KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, and some of the other large players that are trying to attract the same people to do the same types of jobs. So the reality is a lot of people, especially your age, that are coming out of school, the first thing we often go for is the money. Now that is a little different with your generation, but I'm saying it's still the thing. Like, I know I'd rather make 240 grand a year than 45 or 30 or 0 or whatever ACAS supports you on. So the idea is that you have the same people going after the same different types of characters. And the problem is, like, there's only so many folks that you can really pull out. Spending more on middle management is such a big problem. So the idea is when you're in a large company, you want to stack the deck. So if you have a department, you want to bring in as many managers who can also bring in more people because it makes you look more important. Whether or not you do more work doesn't actually matter. It's the aesthetics of like, wow, this guy manages 500 people. But how many managers do you have within that? And how many of those people are actually doing actionable things on those projects? And the reality is you have a lot of bloated departments. You have a lot of bloated companies that might be actually doing the same thing in multiple places and don't realize nobody's learning from the same mistakes. And there's a lot of compartmentalization in there, but that's more bureaucracy. So disruptive startups are definitely taking market share. So think of this as like the death by 1,000 cuts situation. Imagine, a company that maybe back in the day, I hate using Uber because it's kind of a different model. But the idea is like when cab companies were around and they were like, hey, like, what are you going to do? Walk, or take the fucking bus? All of a sudden Uber comes out. Then you have a bunch of other little players like Lyft. And now there's a million other little ride sharing, different versions of that. You have little scooters. So the idea is that all of these large companies that used to have a monopoly on whatever their sector or product was, it's no longer the deal. And it's a lot easier to go from zero into a market. And I'm an example of that. Granted, it took a year and a half with a lot of extra work, but paying clients later, and I'm there. And it's not too hard to continue to scale because I'm doing different things than a lot of the large players are. In terms of losing on all fronts, again, these guys are doing a lot of the things that I think worked maybe in yesteryear. So you see a lot of marketing departments that will spend an exorbitant amount in budget. Look at Accenture. They're still spending millions of dollars on newspapers, magazines, and billboards. Like there are Accenture billboards in Copenhagen. Like, what are you guys doing? Nobody looks at, like, when was the last time you actually looked at a billboard, unless it was like a really attractive person, but you don't really remember the product? You're like, oh, she's hot. Like, that's it, and it's this whole crazy thing. This year actually marks the first year that the old school traditional sense of advertising has been overshadowed by digital advertising. I just did a speech over at Tech Barbecue about why anybody with the CMO job title is mostly full of shit. So that one's on my website, Clint Marketing, but that's a whole different story. So the idea is that you're looking at startups from the standpoint of collaboration. You're not trying to compete. It's David and Goliath coming together and working together, not necessarily battling one another. And this is one of the hardest things that I continue to have to push into a lot of these larger players. So meeting with Volkswagen, and their first knee-jerk reaction is, cool, what types of startups should we buy out? If you buy out a startup, the idea is that's the whole reason some people get into that game. A lot of leadership leaves. And by the way, if you bring in a startup and basically go, okay, we're Volkswagen, we bought you, we're going to tell you how to run your business now. You're like, fuck you, I've been doing this for the last 8 years. This has been my entire dream. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. They're like, well, yeah, but we pay the bills. So there's this really messed up collaboration aspect of it that isn't working just yet. And those that have figured it out are actually doing okay. I would say Danske Bank has gone kind of the low end of figuring it out. Maersk is probably on the higher end. Capital One, there's a bunch of other companies out there that are doing a really great job. Google, or X as they're called, Google X, it's basically like their big version of this, is probably the best player that does this. And I'll show an example of that. So bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is basically the concept of nothing can get done. I mean, everybody knows what that is, right? Nothing can get done because there's so many steps, so much red tape to go through. I've dealt with that when I basically tried to sell, it was a course for getting either students back to work or disenfranchised workers back to work. The problem was it took 3 months for them to get through all the red tape in order to be able to take my class, to get government funding to pay for it. Sometimes you end up getting mired down in all this stuff. Both American space shuttle explosions were because of bureaucracy. The reason the space shuttle looks like a giant fucking school bus, bureaucracy. The reason we don't have one anymore, bureaucracy. So it's crazy, right? And the problem is you end up getting stuck in these little systems, and that's what that is down there with ants. Basically, it's the circle of death. The idea is that once ants get in this motion and they can't break it, they go into this circle and essentially entire hives die off. It's this weird thing in nature that happens on occasion, and there's no explanation for it. My explanation is maybe bureaucracy. It's a weird metaphor, but it fucking works. So one of my favorite things when I used to work at a larger company, it was the Washington Post, so not gigantic, but big enough. And there was a lot of meetings for the sake of meetings. I think if anybody's had an internship in a company that has more than 1,000 people, you'll find that there's a lot of meetings for the sake of meetings. And I think that inhibits a lot of the growth and potential focus that you could have. There is no reason to have a Monday morning meeting at 9 o'clock before people have had their coffee. Looks like most people have had some of their coffee here. I heard somebody was hungover. I'm praying for you. But I mean, Sunday fun day, that's what it's all about, right? So I get it. But it's one of those things that I think it's really difficult to navigate in a place that doesn't allow for that flexibility. Pivots aren't possible. They can't kill projects that don't work. I'm going to go into examples of that. And there's definitely no failure bonus, and I'll show what that is as well. So culture, I started kind of talking about that before. So this generation, my generation as well, hates hierarchy. It's like, why are you in charge? You're not my real dad. And it's like, well, because I got fucking 12 years of experience. What are you talking about? You know? But it's one of those things, realistically, you guys have grown up with technology in your lap. Part of what I spoke about over at my CMO speech was essentially highlighting that most of the people that became CMOs, the average age is 52 years old. When they graduated college, that means that they would have been roughly 22, 23-ish. If they went to a 4-year program in the United States, that means that they basically had another 6 years pre-internet to do their job. 6 years of not having the internet and probably a laptop that looked more like a fucking typewriter. So why are you telling me how to do digital campaigns when you've been behind the curve for the last 20 years? Now, this obviously pissed off an older generation, but what I'm worried about is the type of kids that grew up with an iPad in their lap and understand everything about user experience. And this isn't right because it's not what everybody knows. It's not intuitive, because intuitive is built into a kid that shits their pants while still doing a game on their iPad. That's crazy, and that's coming, right? And that's here, actually. So startups really seem extreme to some of these players because it's a do or die type of situation. So the idea is that I got into doing my own thing as an entrepreneur because I didn't like taking orders from some asshole ahead of me, but I also liked learning, and I felt like I kept getting stopped from learning wherever I was. So I kept creating my own things. It also didn't help that I graduated at the height of the economic depression and there were no jobs. So get ready for that. That's actually coming for you guys in like a year and a half. So it'll be fun. You can be entrepreneurs. So yeah, I think a lot of these larger cultures are also afraid of change. So speaking with the folks over at Maersk Tankers, it's their innovation lab. They're the only ones that get to go to work wearing like t-shirts and jeans. Everybody else has to wear fucking suits. And so like people are walking in two different directions to go to work over at kind of like the Maersk HQ. And it's so funny because like, well, what the fuck? How come those guys get to dress normal? And it's like, well, that's part of your culture. We don't do that here. And I got to be honest, I wore the monkey suit for about a year when I worked at the Post, and I hated it. You know, like the first week, it's like, hey, I'm a fancy boy, man in a suit, you know, like private detective. But after like a week of that, you're like, this sucks. Like, why can't I just dress normal? And you'll see that that's something that you might get into yourself. And sometimes you can't fight that culture. I don't see where that has anything to do with my productivity, but that's a different rant. So revenue focused, right? This is the biggest motherfucker of all. So the idea is essentially that a lot of these partners, a lot of the folks that are at the very top are focused on quarterly bonuses. The idea is that if they don't generate revenue in the immediate, they don't see the quarterly bonus or the yearly bonus. They're not focused on what this company looks like in 5 years, 10 years, because guess what? They're already in their golden parachute era. They're on their way out. So why would they make sure to make less money in a short term, or sorry, in a short term in order to make more in a long term? And this is prevalent throughout all of these large companies, whether it's directors, whether it's partners, whether it's CEOs, it doesn't matter. And it's really difficult to swap that. And the idea is that when you work with a lot of like innovation labs or corporate garages, you'll see that they're rewarding different things. They're rewarding the growth together. They're rewarding killing projects. They're rewarding a lot of different things. And I'm going to go into some examples of that. But I think it's really interesting. It's this do the right thing for too long. And I can't say enough about that. So what does real innovation look like? And I'll tie in a few personal elements to this. So this slide, it's not the prettiest thing, but I often do put this into a lot of my presentations. It's understanding one element of marketing in order to get better at the rest. So how many people actually want to mess around with marketing at some point? How many people are interested in marketing? Okay, cool, nice. All right, like half the room or more. Cool, so the idea is not that you need to learn all of these things simultaneously. I think you need to pick one area, get relatively good at that, understand all elements of that, and then start applying it to others as you kind of move forward. So the idea is that if you're really good with content, you can start doing PR and amplification because that's part of boosting something. If you understand these two, you can start getting good at technical SEO on-site and off-site. If you understand SEM, you can start applying it to social media and vice versa. All of these kind of build on each other, and they're all loosely connected. Nothing within marketing is kind of its own system, which is fun, interesting, and also bizarre the more that you look at it. So, you know, the further you get down into this stuff, it gets really complicated, but I would encourage you to get good at one thing. So this is John Crowley. He's one of my favorite examples, and it's why I feel like I have a chance to disrupt my industry, the architecture industry. This guy basically exudes the, quote, radical outsiders offer unique perspectives. So John Crowley, essentially, he was in banking for 20 years. And the guy had he had two daughters. The second one was born with the same genetic disability. And the idea was these kids were given under 10 years to basically live. So he's like, okay, cool. So there's no cure to this degenerative disease. And they're like, no, sorry. So he's like, all right, well, I'm not going to sit here and watch my two kids die. So what can I do to fix this? So he essentially leaves the finance industry and jumps into biotech and finds all of the researchers that are inside of all over the world, all over Europe, all over China, and the United States that are inside of degenerative disease research, pulls them in, puts them in one place, and within 4.5 years, cures the disease and sells off his company for a cool $135 million. The dude's a fucking baller, right? And the idea is that is an outside perspective that only could have worked with somebody that wasn't a part of that industry to say, why aren't the same people that think right working together on the same problems? And nobody's like, well, we never thought of that. And it's like, what, were you fucking serious? Like, why not? It's like, solve a problem. So the idea is I'm hoping that the way that I look at marketing, automation, and the way that I've generated leads might end up helping the architecture industry. Now, I don't pretend to be John Crowley, but I think I do have some advantages. So I want to go into some examples as to like how innovation really comes together. If you give engineers something in the way of a confine or a loose structure that they can't go outside of, they get better. You put them in a box, they have to work outside of it. So a limitation would be like, you have to basically build a structure without any heavy equipment. So this is an example of a bunch of guys that are essentially doing the work of a pile driver. So let's take real world examples of this. So this is, everybody knows like Nerd Jesus, Steve Jobs, right? So the idea is he was basically tasked his team with build me a phone with a camera the size of a wallet with no buttons. And people lost their fucking minds when they realized that they could actually use the screen to swipe. And the last couple of times I've tried to show this, it didn't work. Let me see if the audio is actually coming through on this because I love this little clip. Bear with me here. No internet. So I guess I won't show it again today. Yeah, no worries. So the idea is the first time that people saw in 2007 somebody swiping upwards on a phone, it was like magic. They hadn't seen that before because nobody had done that. The closest thing that somebody had gotten to that was the wheel on the old iPods, and it blew people's minds. So another example, right? SpaceX. Everybody knows Elon Musk. So basically, he was tasked with basically taking a rocket, making it cheaper than existing technology, making it reusable, and carrying a bigger payload than all existing alternatives. Now, bear in mind, for those that aren't into like rocket science or aeronautics, the idea is that the most expensive part of these rockets is the actual engine, not the fucking fuel. So when you send one of these big fuel cells with the engine on the bottom of it out into the atmosphere and then it burns up upon reentry, that's where you lose most of your money. So the reason he's saving that is because the motor at the very bottom, the engine, is the expensive part. And that's how he's managed to disrupt an entire nation that used to do this as, you know, part of like a nationalism type thing. Pretty baller. WeWork has been in the news a lot. I don't know if anybody's seen WeWork in the news with the CEO that's just stepped down. There's a ton of crazy shit in there if you start digging in. They had to pull back from going IPO. Like, if anybody's like nerding out on any of the startup stuff, I'd love to talk to you because it's crazy. So essentially, at their peak, they were valued at $47 billion with a B, $billion. And they had less office space than one of their biggest competitors, this company called Regus, who, by the way, owns most of their office space. And the idea is Regus was only valued at 4. Why is that? And the reality is it was hype. People wanted to be a part of WeWork because if you go to their fucking website, if you watch any of their stuff on social media, it's about a culture of building. Like, I want to work there just watching their shit. And it's beautiful. A friend of mine works remotely, a guy from 24 Slides, great little company here in Copenhagen. And he's like, I went to, in Lima, they have 3 new WeWork offices, and they're gorgeous. Everything around them is shit. But these 3 offices are pristine. And the idea was basically, they came in and said, We want to basically make office procurement in metropolitan areas our focus. We want to make it cheaper. We don't want to require any long-term leases, and we want to make renting an office space sexy. I really feel like WeWork was all about their brand, and that's why they're losing now, because it was all hype. One more example, this is IKEA. For those that don't know, IKEA is basically making mobile everything. So they're making mobile cafes, mobile gyms, mobile pharmacies. The idea is, why the fuck leave your house, fatty? You can just get something to come to you, and then you don't have to walk. No, but the idea is, why not, if everything is autonomous, why not give people the experience of what they're looking for on the way to their experience? So mobile movie theaters is everything. And these guys are investing super heavily in this because they're taking a very simple concept of travel and trying to radically change it. Whether or not it'll work for them, I don't know, but I admire at least trying. So this kind of gets at what I was talking about with Steve Jobs, and I think there's really something amazing to it. It's the last little sentence that I love the most. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. You know, the first time that you probably saw Street View on your phone, I felt like I fell inside of my phone when I touched it twice, and then all of a sudden I'm looking at the street and I'm like, whoa, what did I just do? And it was one of those crazy things. A month later, it was like, like it wore off and it wasn't cool anymore. And it's one of those crazy things that I think is part of innovation in general as well, is what have you done for me lately? You know, and that's unfortunate, but that's just life. So how do we get there, right? This seems like a lot of hype and a lot of energy, but there's a number of different strategies that I've seen that actually work. So innovation always, always, always starts at the top. We take a bottom-up approach when we focus on trying to get into architecture firms. Certainly over at Valuer, that was something that I battled with as well. The idea was, I need to find the highest person on the totem pole that will answer a phone call or read an email. Because, by the way, the CEOs, CTOs, CFOs, anybody with C kind of in their top name, executives, they're not checking mostly their emails, and they're certainly not checking people that are spamming them. So I need to find somebody that will be an advocate and basically push me upwards. Every once in a while, you do get to meet with these people, and they push from the top down. Really difficult. But the idea is that you need these folks to demand the change. There's this great little video that I used to play when I was drinking with my buddies back in college, and it's John F. Kennedy talking about going to the moon, right? And the energy behind that it's super powerful because the guy absolutely believes it. Height of the Cold War, we're going to beat those Russians, whatever. But the idea was there was something behind that energy that inspired so many other people. And the idea is that you need to be that inspirational when you are a CEO. And I try to do that. I try to give that to my team, but you know, who the fuck am I? We're a really small company. We're a startup. But eventually, who knows? Maybe down the road, I might end up being up there. But the idea is, when I'm trying to collaborate with large companies, I need to make sure that they understand this is a greater mission. The mission is to disrupt. It is to change. And I need them to be a part of the change. The best leaders remove barriers and say, here's an open playing field. Run. Do what you can. And the last little bit, it's my favorite thing. Like, has anybody ever gone to a hackathon? Who knows what a hackathon is? A couple people? Okay. So like a hackathon, they have business hackathons. They also have like web developer, front end, back end, really techie hackathons. The idea is a company will basically bring people in for 2 full days and say, you have little teams, get together, solve this giant problem, go. And they have 48 hours or however long the hackathon is. Usually it's 2 days. And essentially, whoever comes up with the best solution, sometimes if it's just a business model, fantastic, you get fucking money. Sometimes you get jobs. Sometimes you get prizes like new laptops and stuff. It's really cool. But the problem is they're not actually using these to build anything. That's the unfortunate thing. So like they spend all this time. The CTO or even CEO comes with a big novelty check. Thanks for coming. Everybody waves and goes home. You're not going to build something worth anything in 48 hours. Like, what sense does that make? I think it's nice to be creative. But if there was actually something real there, then the fucking CTO would stick around. He'd start asking the right questions to get people together and actually put them into something where they can do more than just, hey, that was a great weekend. I don't know who that's for. It's a marketing push, and unfortunately, nobody's doing it right. So what happens if you don't change? This is like some of the messed up stuff. So I don't know if most people know, but that's actually what Nokia used to be. So back in 1871, Nokia was a paper mill, right? So like that was a really long time ago, but they started as a paper mill. And essentially, they evolved over time to become the major mobile player that they were. But what they forgot was this whole innovation thing. They got too comfortable. They realized they had this crazy amount of market saturation. So like the story is like super bizarre. So at their peak in the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, they were at 70 billion in terms of like overall value. And that's in the early 2000s. I don't know what that is in today's money. But the idea, that's crazy. That was 20 years ago. It makes me feel super old. But yeah, the CEO stands up in front of all of his people in front of this the shareholder meeting as they're being disrupted by Apple. And he basically goes, I feel like I'm a man standing on a burning platform. And the next day they had to fire 10,000 people. The next month, 10,000 more and 10,000 more. People in fucking Finland still talk about this. They still haven't recovered, right? These are people's lives. And because they were like, no, we're good. We're going to keep building these little brick indestructible things. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? The blue ones? Yeah, like everybody kind of had one. They have like the game Snake on them, right? That was all that they were offering. They weren't looking at software, right? And, you know, there's different versions of that. BlackBerry kind of had a similar. I do an example of Toys R Us. I think now the Danish version is like DR, I think, or BR. Is it BR? Yeah, so, I mean, there's so many different examples of that. But more relevant stuff, these are some of my favorites. So Boeing hired $9 an hour Indian dudes to program their navigation. Shocker, 2 fucking planes plow into the ocean, bunch of people died. They're going to be out billions with a B, billions upon dollars, paying that class action lawsuit for years. And by the way, like there's a bunch of companies that are like, oh, I know that we ordered 50 of those, but I want my money back. And I want my money back because I'm taking like deposit money because I'm losing wages. So like they're fucked, like big time, right? And consumer confidence is everything. So they screwed up. Accenture basically built a $32 million website for Hertz that never went live. And they're like, well, good luck with all that. See you later. Bye. Got my money. So they're going to be in litigation forever. $32 million. Why the fuck wouldn't you partner with a really amazing software firm that then you could collaborate with for the future? Like, why wouldn't you, if you found a really amazing navigation startup that had all the right parts and the right people, why not work with them instead of saving a couple of bucks on some dudes that really didn't give a shit and killing a bunch of people? Danske Bank would rather launder money to drug lords than actually like do fraud detection. So that's a whole thing. And GE can't get out of their own way. GE used to be known for light bulbs. They're selling off their entire light bulb market. It's because they don't want to innovate. They're like, we got good at it. Finished product, done. Like you can't continue to do that. And that's why startups like mine, startups like maybe some of yours, if you're so inclined in the future, need to start going after these larger players. That's where the fund's at. That's where the money's at. And if they know what the fuck they're doing, they'll actually give you a shot. And it's happening all the time. So I had a fun little conversation. It was brief with Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know if people know who that is. Does anybody know who Gary Vaynerchuk is? Anybody? Yeah, I don't know. I think he's one of like the really cool influencers in terms of the startup scene. He gets a little repetitive, but the guy basically is an early investor in Facebook, Uber, a bunch of other like really amazing startups, Twitter. So, I mean, the guy's made his money, runs a really awesome media company with like 800 employees. And I basically asked him straight up, like, what happens if corporations don't continue to try to find new ways by partnering with startups? And his answer is quite interesting. He's like, well, they should go out of business. Like, they should die off. And that will give room for new people to come and actually make something that's worthwhile. And unfortunately, that might be the world that we're living in. So my goal as ArchitectureQuote is to find some major players that understand what I'm trying to do, or at least some small to medium-sized players that are ready to grow. And I'll show some kind of reasoning behind that. How am I doing on time, by the way? Am I good? Cool. So inspiration, right? I think I want to show a couple of like really cool examples of like where inspiration actually starts. So Google X or X as it's called now. Like, they don't need to put Google before their name. We're X. Like, I think that's so lame. But yeah, so they take basically this problem affecting millions of people, and they come up with a radical solution, and then they test it. And then they try to optimize that for efficiency so that it becomes affordable. So on the upper right, the top one, that's basically Google's first smart car. Like, how can we get this thing to navigate roads that are killing millions of people every few years? So it's 1.2 million people die on the road each year. If these cars were smart, we would essentially save those lives. Still doing that, and it's still coming to market. It'll be here before you know it. one that's really interesting, and by the way, the reason they're doing that is guess what navigation they're going to use, and guess what people are going to use to input information, and guess where they're going to end up targeting. Hey, I know that you went to this place the other day. Here's an ad for these guys. There's obviously a leverage point for a commercial value by creating cars that are actually driving you from place to place because you own the data, which is super important, right? The next one is basically there's 4 billion people on our planet without the internet, right? So how do we get at least 3G service to these people in really remote areas? And they started building weather balloons and testing weather balloons that could travel and cover the same areas in the upper atmosphere. And it fucking works. And that's crazy. So that's already being implemented now, and they're only scaling now. And the idea is, of course, they want to own the data, which makes sense. So at the end of the day, they're still winning and they're helping people. I think there's a lot of bullshit bingo when it comes to this impact stuff. That's a whole different speech for a different day. But be aware that there are things that are impactful that actually do end up providing commercial value as well. So collaboration with startups, I want to go into like one unique example that kind of threw off my CEO. So has anybody heard of the book Blitzscaling? Nah, that's all right. So Blitzscaling, the guys came to Denmark and kind of spoke about it, and I got to talk with Chris Ye, the other guy who wrote it, guy who founded LinkedIn. So yeah, I basically see the way that a lot of these large companies are, and this is true of the architecture industry, this is true of every industry, they're like out of shape Olympians. And the problem is this is so, it's so everywhere. That's the problem. So this is an example. This is Rulon Gardner. He's not the strapping Russian guy. He was always kind of a little pudge. This is him here, right? And this is also him here. So he went on a reality show called The Biggest Loser, where you're supposed to lose weight, because the guy turned into such a fat fuck. Because like once you reach that level, he's like, yeah, I won gold, 2000 Olympics. What's up? Best in the world. He gave up on doing anything else. And the problem was he got lazy, stopped working out, stopped trying to do anything new, and basically became sedentary. And the problem was now he wanted to get back into shape. And I look at startups as kind of the perfect example of this. So think about Rulon Gardner. He needed to change his behavior. So he had to go see something in the way of a coach and somebody that was going to get his life on track. That's what leadership within a company is all about. Then he needed a better diet because the guy was eating fucking cheeseburgers all day long and donuts. So the idea is if you drop off a bunch of groceries at a super fat dude's house, it's gonna be like, I don't know what this is, but thanks for leaving this stuff. The dumpster's right there. It's not going to work. But if you take a personal chef and show this person how to cook, all of a sudden they're like, oh, this is actually my favorite foods now, right? And then a personal trainer, so consultants, somebody that can lead these companies together to make this this company work together with this person. It's a loose metaphor, but the idea was eventually Rulon Gardner dropped out of the show because he couldn't stay with the program. But I do think it's fascinating because I meet a lot of these large companies that are still using the victories of the past to continue to recognize, where they are today. So some of the cultures of startups, it's super different. This is a picture of I Am Legend. And I remember somebody posting this on LinkedIn. They're like, yeah, this is what startup life was about. And I was like, yeah, but it's except minus the dog and there's no fucking sun. Like, it's really rough, and I can't explain from some of my experiences of the past where, you have to fire a grown-ass man who's 38 years old who has 2 fucking kids because you can't afford to, pay him, And he's like, Taylor, I thought we were in this for the long run. I'm like, Risa, I got no money, zero. I'm living on a fucking friend's couch. That sucks. You think of all, the popping bottles and, G6 flights. It's not that, And unfortunately, some of the stuff that keeps you in is some of the stuff that, is worth actually kind of continuing to focus on. These people are passionate, right? So if I bring in the same product to, let's say, I don't know how familiar people are with some of the larger companies out here, Henny Larson or Beerson Ingalls, Big. These are some of the biggest companies out here. If I bring this project into them, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy. Or they'll essentially be like, all right, we'll try it ourselves. It'll take them 10 times as long. Because the problem is they'll put a team on it that doesn't give a shit, doesn't really care about the solution. They're just doing a job. Whereas entrepreneurs care about the outcomes because it's their life's work. They've focused on this. So imagine giving somebody with a motor resources to actually propel themselves forward. It has an effect. They got into business for the right reasons. A lot of entrepreneurs don't get into business to actually make fucking money. I know that sounds surprising, but that's the truth. I don't really give a shit about the money. I just don't want to work for assholes anymore. And that's a big enough like motivator for me to actually stick with it. And everybody's motivator is different. Sometimes you just want to be acknowledged for doing a great job. Or maybe it is money. I don't know. Or maybe it's saving the planet. I don't know. So I think there is some interesting stuff in terms of using bootstrapping from a startup perspective. Bootstrapping means you have no money. That means you can't waste exorbitant amounts of money to build what you got. ArchitectureQuote is so like that right now. It's crazy. And they're fiercely independent. One of the things that I love throwing in the face of CBS kids, nobody here also goes to CBS, right? Cool. Fuck those kids. So it's one of those things like, I mean, it's everybody in those classes feels like they already know everything. And so like, I'll end up meeting kids that want an internship with me and, you know, they sit down and be like, look, I'm going to put together a marketing strategy for you, show you how to go to market. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it took me 12 years to get here, and I'm still trying to get up to a level where I feel like I'm capable of saying these things. So honestly, there's a big difference between grit and IQ, right? I don't give a shit what school you went to. If you can hustle, if you can work really fucking hard, if you can show me that you're dedicated and you give a shit, that is like 90% of it. The rest will come. I kid you not. That's why I haven't had too many of those kids in my marketing department. And it's nothing against, it is something against them. But I think it's one of those things, having a little bit of the underdog definitely gives you a lot more momentum. And you'd be surprised. And honestly, everything's out there for you to learn. Not for nothing. Most of the stuff that I do, you can look up online. It's not that hard. It's called Google, right? So yeah, I'm gonna move on from that slide and go on to that forever. So one of the things that I have a big issue with venture capitalists, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've met with a bunch of angel investors and VCs. One of my favorites, I was over at DTU. They have this, I don't care, I'll say the name. It's like the Nordic Roadshow where they bring in 3 startups from Norway, Finland, not Sweden for some chance or some reason, and Denmark. And so I was up against basically a total of 8 other startups, total of 9. So we do a round robin, and I'm essentially sitting down with different investors. And I was sitting with this investor, and the guy was younger than me. He was 27 or 28. And I'm asking him all these really pointed questions about business models, different pricing structures, sweat equity. And the guy's giving me really aloof answers. And I'm like, this isn't what I expected. Like, I have this weird version of a VC in my head as like this brilliant God among men, where it's like, you're a venture capitalist. Like, that's everybody's dream job. You just like go buy yourself some more money, you know? So I sit down at my laptop after meeting with him, and I look him up, and the fucking kid shares the same last name as one of the board members. And I'm like, oh, it's your fucking dad's company. Like, that's why I don't need your advice, you fucking prick, you know? And it's super aggravating because I'm like, damn, I worked my ass off to sit just across the table from this guy. And unfortunately, hey, that's life, right? That's how it goes. But eventually, I have a feeling if you look at a long enough timeline, your boy's gonna come out on top, because I do have that grit difference. And so what a lot of these folks say is we look for people, and people. And I kind of get that. I also think it's important to note that it's the figure jumps around, but it's between 90 and 92% of all investors in general, have never started a company before in their lives. So if possible, do everything as bootstrapped so you don't have to take their money, so you don't have to take their advice, because it's all bullshit. Just going in there because I'm frustrated. So where do you find startups? Where do large companies work with startups? Where do investors find startups? Here are the different areas. Accelerators and incubators. There's a ton of great ones out in Copenhagen. I'm not going to name drop them, but Valuer had put out an article on different accelerators and incubators if you're interested in looking for those. By the way, best place to go if you're looking for an internship is just go door to door. Most people in this country don't do that because it's really like, I don't know, it's too forward. But if you do that, you will stand out. I do teach a bit of this stuff, but that's a different conversation for a different day. So competitions, pitch events, and startup conferences, another great place to not only get jobs, but match startups with either corporations or customers or investors. Schools and academia, every school has an accelerator. This school is no different. Random Googling, you can find stuff on the internet, angel.co, Crunchbase. And a lot of these companies have an in-house startup analyst. I've been in contact with a lot of those folks, and it's relatively difficult because they're inundated with too many different projects and too many different investments. So let's talk real quick about startup implementation. I promise I'm eventually getting to the stuff that matters about my startup. I just wanted to give a good frame of reference. So in terms of innovation labs and managing startups, the idea is you want to keep them separate. And it's for the same reason that most of these folks got into business, not to be managed by people that tell them what to do and let them make the mistakes that they need to learn from, but also give them the ownership of having their own thing inside of your workspace. The idea is like if you ask, what is what is the fastest fish in the ocean? It's the sailfish, and the fastest animal on land is the cheetah. You can't take the cheetah and throw it into the water and say, all right, fucking do what you do on land. It doesn't work, and it's vice versa with the fish. And the idea is that you can't take somebody that's outside of your corporate structure and squeeze them into it and say, do what you do out there. It's just, wear your fucking suit and say yes sir, no sir. It doesn't work. And that's one of the hardest things to explain to a lot of these innovation labs. Failures and incentives are super important. This guy's name is Astro Teller. It's like the greatest fucking name ever. Sounds like a porn star from the future, but or a fortune teller. But the idea is that Google X, or X as they're called, they have a failure bonus. So if they kill a project internally, everybody that was on that project gets rewarded. That way they're not wasting time, because the idea is everybody's afraid, well, what happens if I kill this project? I'll lose my job. It's like, they won't, we'll find one for you. You're working at Google, we're a fucking family, which whatever that means. But the idea is that you get rewarded for saying, this is not possible given the current technology, it's not possible given the resources required in order to scale this, or it's not possible given the market, we've already tested it out. Those are the differences between wasting millions of dollars years down the road to continue to carry something that nobody ever wanted. We've all seen different products that are like that. And this is kind of the fun part of, what's his name? One of the inventors, Thomas Edison, there we go, that basically, it was written there, I didn't even see that. I have not failed, I just found 10,000 ways that won't work. I think this is so true of startups, it's so true of growth hacking, it's so true of anybody developing a product, is understanding, all right, this isn't the way that these things are done in this environment, let me try this. The idea is that a lot of this stuff always boils down to the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule. So 20% of your focus and your work ends up getting you 80% of the results. So for like Valuer, it was 20% of the blog posts were 80% of the traffic that we got, 80% of the alcohol consumed by 20% of the population. That's true, that guy over there. No, I'm messing with you. But the idea is, unfortunately, 20% of your startups will end up pulling in 80% of the results. Many of them will fail. My startup could potentially fail. I'm well aware of that. I've done it 6 times before, so why the fuck wouldn't this fail? The idea is I'm willing to actually try. And I don't see that happening given the model, but it's always one of those things you have to be aware of. Last little bit in terms of managing innovation in practical terms is the Jeff Bezos 2 pizza rule. I absolutely love this one. The idea is you should never have a meeting that's large enough that can't comfortably feed two pizzas worth of food. So the idea is never more than like 7 people. Why do you need that many people? And I see this all the time within startups, within large companies. Keep it small. Meetings should never basically be what an email could do. Like, just send me a fucking email. We didn't all need to sit there and nod our heads like it made sense. Way too many wasted days on meetings. Getting mired down in bureaucracy sucks. Internal employees allowed to innovate on the stuff that they're actually watching and interested in and affecting. That's so interesting and what the phrase entrepreneurship is all about. I can talk about that later, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. I think letting startups set their milestones, because startups happen to be a lot more hard on themselves. So that's all my innovation stuff. I hope that wasn't too fucking boring, because you'll really hate this. So this is the architecture industry, and I want to break down some of the whys behind the why. So the architecture industry is one of the oldest industries in the world, and I figured there's got to be something there that I'm not understanding. Some of the first people that I met when I moved to Denmark happened to be architects. It just so happens when you're not Danish, and for those that aren't, kind of know, it's super hard to make friends. Really fucking hard, and I don't understand why, because I'm awesome. I think I'm awesome. Mom says I'm awesome. But it's one of those things. So I started making friends with some international people, and a lot of them happen to be architects. So I started asking some of the most basic questions from my marketing standpoint, which was, how does one go about getting leads for these multi-million-dollar projects, or even the small ones? And the answer was always consistently word of mouth. In 2019, nothing works that way. Not even dating works that way. Like, nobody fucking meets people in person anymore. It's all on an app, and then you're like, hey, are you you? Yeah, I'm me. So, you know, like, you're a little bigger than you were in your pictures, but I'll ignore it. So it's one of the, all right, we've all been there, or maybe just me. So the idea is that they've had really limited disruption, and that's super frustrating, because if you look at the industry as a whole, it's one of the larger industries in the world. AEC, we're talking architecture, engineering, and construction. They really are old school. And I actually played a little bit in the construction industry, and I'll explain some of that later. But digitalization has really left these guys behind. The furthest they've come is essentially updating some of the drawing software that they're using, but they're still using stuff that was created 20 years ago, so 2 decades ago. There's a lot of volatility in this market. So volatility essentially means supply and demand. So everything's great when the economy is good, right? Everybody's making it rain. There's projects galore. Everybody wants to build a house, and everybody wants to build a school. What happens when there's no fucking money, right? Everybody forgets what happened at the last recession. And the problem is that's coming really, really fast, like really fast. So I'm banking on the fact that when there are less leads, people are going to be fighting over the same projects. So that is a benefit to me. When the market gets too full and there's lots of business to be had, people aren't as worried about it. There's far less startup saturation. This kind of sector or industry in terms of disruption is called prop tech. For those that haven't heard that phrase, it's property technology. This is anything from real estate tech to architecture, AutoCAD type technology, or what I'm selling, which is basically deal flow software and a collaboration platform. To become an architect, it requires a master's degree, but the unfortunate thing is they don't take classes like this. There is no business class within your master's degree within architecture. There is no marketing class. So you have a lot of really old school mindsets that are only focused on, this is what beauty looks like, this is how you interact with a space. So the way that this industry looks is it's almost like a cone. There's lots of people, well, a pyramid, I guess, lots of people at the very top, and then lots of really small players at the bottom. I'm looking for kind of the middle and the bottom sector, and a few at the very top, and I'll explain how that works. So why the architecture industry in terms of a customer standpoint? So it is a two-sided platform. So the purchase of a house or the purchase of architecture services in order to build your dream home, your villa, or to build a school or a library or whatever it is that you want to build, that will be some people's largest purchase of their entire life. How many people here have ever worked in a restaurant? Yeah, damn. Okay, awesome. Doesn't it suck, right? Like, that's the worst. But it's one of those things I realized in school, and I'm sorry it's not the same way out here. But in the States, it's like a mandatory tip of 15 to 20%. Like, that's what we do. I don't know why we do that, but it's a thing. So I knew that if entrees were $50, I would get 15 to 20% of whatever that entree costs. So your boy was making a lot more money. If entrees were $10, then I'd be making $2 to $3 per table. It's crazy. There's no fucking money in that. So go for the biggest ticket items. That's why venture capitalists are like, you're an idiot. Why not be a venture capitalist? Because we're dealing in the millions. The margins are great. Or if you're a real estate agent, which takes, no offense, but not as much education, just a nice smile and, hey, here's a cool house. Then there's good margins in that too. So I'm looking at this from the standpoint of one of the biggest purchases that you can make out there is essentially architecture services to build your dream home or something else that is related to your business. Finder's fees are a thing. Like, finder's fees went out a long time ago, but in most industries. But the idea is that if you line up an architect with an individual, you can expect 3 to 7% of the total cost of the project. So my buddy James, who's one of the founders and advisors, who is an architect, just finished a $250 million project in China. And if he had made 3 to 7% by bringing that to the table, I think we'd be on a tropical beach right now, like high-fiving, like, but it is what it is. So high margins. In a slow economy, again, this is where the money's at because everybody's fighting for the same leads. I actually started a home remodeling company when I was still finishing school. Funny story. The guy that I was working for put most of his money up his nose, total asshole and drug addict. But he offered me a job. And I got to tell you, I got super excited about selling $10,000 worth of windows or $15,000 or even $20,000 worth of windows because I would make 20% of that on the top, which was amazing. But the problem was I was like, I can do that. And you start figuring out an industry. And God, I got to tell you, most industries aren't that hard, especially the old school ones. It just takes a little while to go, oh, that it's like Legos. Like that's where that one goes. And oh, like, okay, like I've got to turn around and put that in there. So some of the last little bit to be aware of in terms of the way that you can't set these things up. So government secured funds are essentially, it's a relational way of saying if a project is above a certain price, you have to put it through a tendering process. Has anybody here ever messed with government contracting at all? Cool. Okay, awesome. So I won a $4.3 million government contract. That was like my first successful startup to basically teach veterans how to get back to work. And when you figure out the bureaucracy of this application process and sorting out the RFP, request for proposal, and then submitting the proposal and following all the steps, it's not that hard, it's just tedious. So the idea is that in order for you to do a personal project, even on your own, you have to show that you've done a tendering process. If it is above 144,000 euros, if it is a government construction contract, it's the other one there. It's crazy, it's this whole thing, but the idea is I want to peel off contracts and put those into my platform. And I'll show you exactly what I mean in the platform. I think I should have swapped the slides, but it's all good. So I already explained my brief experience with, this guy, Ron Skelly, total scumbag. But this was my experience here in Denmark working for the construction industry. I worked for a company called Genie Belt and basically took them from zero to nearly profitable within about a year and 5 months. They had zero in traffic. I think it was like 150 users a month. By the time I left, it was 55,000 and 650 leads per month. They had more leads than they knew what to do with. And the idea was they just basically merged with another company, which to me is as good as an acquisition. They're now called Let's Build. I found really quickly that it's a very similarly old school industry, construction, very similar to architecture. These guys are still using pen and paper for a lot of stuff. Super old school, very frustrating, but it's one of those interesting things that they're just not aware of what is possible. If you say that you can save them time, you have to show how you can save them time. And that's the difference. So once they saw the platform and it's like, see, this is everything from your really shitty Excel sheet, and now it actually works and it's functional, they're like, oh man, that's like hours of work. And I'm like, yeah. And if you do this now, imagine what you can do on all your future projects. And like, oh man, and it's like, yeah. So I'm trying to do that the same way with architects. And every time I sit down and show an architect, they're like, oh, like I get it, but it's that unknown period, or watching somebody swipe on the iPhone. Wish I had shown that video, but it is what it is. I'm going to move on. So what are architects like? There's Johnny Depp with a scarf and somebody admiring a trash can like it's modern art. These people are artists, which means it's a very different type of person. There's a lot of artists that then own their own companies, but in terms of the business acumen, it's not quite there. And it's incredibly frustrating to see these people that are really amazing at designing functionality and spaces around people and have such difficulty with the business processes and the user experience of how a lead turns into a project. So that's part of what I'm going to be showing in terms of how my company works. These are not technical people. If you look at the far end of a construction architect, somebody that actually understands load-bearing spaces, an engineer type person, they're functionally technical on that side of things, but in terms of software integrations, deal flow, anything in the way of traffic analysis, pulling out lead scoring, the guy's like, I don't know what the fuck this is. And it's like, dude, you're an engineer. Like I figured like I was talking nerd language. It's very different nerd language. So super interesting. So I wanted to show something crazy. One of the biggest architecture firms in all of Denmark is Big Bjertsten Ingels. This is their homepage. So I don't have internet access, but I wanted to show you how fucking bad this is. So it's like, what are you guys doing? So this is it. This is their whole homepage. And if you click these buttons, it just rearranges the icons. And it's like, okay, like, will you guys not like money? I don't understand. Like, you can't sell using this. And the way that you get in touch with somebody is you have to find info at the bottom, and then 5 clicks later, you're actually able to send an email. That's crazy, right? It boggles the mind. So if somebody were to actually come in and do something for them, maybe that could be a great way to make money in the span of a few months, but I want to run something that they have to come back for and pay me on a monthly basis forever. That's why I'm focusing on ArchitectureQuote. I have a few other examples, but I don't have internet access, so I'm not going to pull them up. The small players are no different. So these are some screenshots that I pulled off of, where is it? It's Danske Bolig Architect.dk. The idea is it's a non-functional single-page site that has dates from 10 years ago. Non-functional single-page sites that when you click these things, it just changes the picture, but there's no information. A lot of websites that actually don't load, where it's like, dude, you paid money to get on that site. And it's just, it's lack of knowledge. It's unknown unknowns. So how in the world is somebody supposed to find them? I guess know where they live? Like, that's crazy, right? So enter ArchitectureQuote. So I'm finally getting to the whole company itself. I'm sorry there was such a lead in, but I felt like it was necessary and fun. So ArchitectureQuote is deal flow software and a collaboration tool for the architecture industry. Now, as I've already stated, the whole idea is that it is a word of mouth industry, and I genuinely believe nobody works that way. It's not possible. So I helped a buddy out a long time ago, essentially doing lead aggregation for alarm companies that were trying to sell alarm installation. At its peak, it was making $20,000 a month, like crazy good money. And the idea was it was essentially just pulling in leads and sending them out to the top 5 companies and having them basically bid against each other for the price of the lead, which was super smart. I'll go into some of the different models later, but the idea is that nothing works word of mouth anymore. Of course, there are network effects these days, and we will end up taking referrals all the time, but I genuinely believe that not everybody has this in their network. The other side is super messed up. In Silicon Valley speak, it's called brain drain. So the idea is that architects are project-based work, especially some of the small to medium-sized players. So they have to lay people off, especially the low people on the totem pole. So that's the earliest architects that are starting in a firm, every 6 to 8 months. Because, hey, the project's finished. I can't bench you, meaning I can't just pay you to sit on your ass. So sorry, it's been great. It's been fun. It's been real fun. You're fired. So most of my friends that are architects have been fired each once a year since I've known them for the last 3.5 years. And it sucks. And the reality is, like, it's not going to change unless they're able to start making money while people are on the bench, or they find a different way of doing it. And the problem is, for those that have taken anything in the way of either an HR class or something related to kind of business economics, the amount of time that you have to take in order to train people, I mean, it's crazy, right? And there's this era called the Cinderella period, which is basically the first week up to the first 6 months is when people are still learning processes. They're still understanding how the business works. They're still figuring out who to go for certain documents. So the idea is that by the time they actually get settled in, they're fired. And it's like, it's a giant waste of money, because then you got to bring somebody new in and start all over. So giant waste of resources. And the last one I've already kind of talked about, they don't really use software. So when I ask companies what they use for project management software, they're like, you mean like Excel? And I'm like, no, not like fucking Excel. Like, what do you use? Like Hello Monday? Do you use like Basecamp? Is it something similar to Genie Belt, Procore? And they're like, I've never heard of any of these things. I'm like, you're in the industry, and it's just the most like infuriating thing. And the problem is unknown unknowns. And this is why people make a lot of money as consultants. But again, consulting, not scalable. So some quick facts about the industry and stuff that is baseline, but I'll be looking, hopefully, fingers crossed, for you guys to kind of help me along with some of this stuff. It is a $292 billion with a B billion-dollar network in terms of like the industry. And that's, of course, worldwide, but anybody that is an architect can essentially work on anybody else's projects for the most part worldwide. In 2025, that's supposed to jump all the way up to 300 and essentially 92 billion. So we're looking at magnitudes of scale for an industry that is ripe for disruption. This is what disruption looks like, this giant leap, and it's continuing to go that route. Just in 2018, there were 25,000 projects within the UK, and I guarantee you most of those were gobbled up by probably a handful of players. And the idea is they probably understand a bit more about deal flow and how to access and acquire more projects so that they end up building their company and getting bigger. Because that's all it is. It's a numbers game at the end. The more projects you do, the more revenue you generate, the more people you hire, the more projects you do. It's a really good cycle to be in. That's where the money's at. So this is essentially like what I'm selling. So I have 3 different areas where I'm aggregating leads. The first is government tenders. That means requests for proposals, RFPs, or tenders. That means competitions. So every architect, for whatever reason, has a giant boner for competitions. But the problem is competitions don't always pay the bills. These are stadiums. These are gorgeous libraries that might be in kind of like the central promenade or something. The problem is they're really low in terms of margins because they realize you get to write your name on it, and that's kind of a big deal. But there's a ton of competition on these, on like the really high ones, and very little on like the medium to low ones. So there's money in that. Freelance projects. It's so weird. How many people have heard of Upwork? Fucking hey, guys. We'll have to talk. So Upwork is essentially all about the gig economy. So the idea is if you do video production, animation, if you're a designer, if you write, the idea is that you can charge for your services without needing a business. The whole concept is it's the gig economy. You have side gigs. I used to do all kinds of side gigs and go into stories forever. But the idea is that people are actually posting projects for architects. I need somebody that can work AutoCAD to design a cabin or a villa, or I need somebody to help me check the schematics of this drawing or this phase 2 of the REBA process. Plenty of different freelance projects on Upwork, Guru, Elancer, and dozens of other sites. Those are the main ones that we pull from people per hour as well. And organic leads. So it's 1 every 2 days at this point, signs up on our site. The other day it was somebody in Australia that wanted to basically build a bunch of dorms, like 5,000 square meters worth of dormitories in Australia. And the idea is this is also where my major money is at, because I'm looking at taking 3 to 7% of the total of that project as a finder's fee. This is the stuff that's really hard to find. These are relatively easy because it's using a simple Python script to essentially scrape them every day. The last one means I got to generate enough interest, traffic, and content to drive people to convert on my website. So the platform. So I want to go into traction first, and then I'll show kind of the 2 different areas of the platform. So we have a minimum viable product. The minimum viable product, or MVP, is essentially a lead aggregator that allows leads to display on a platform and gives architects a chance to view these leads, and the people that actually enter in the organic phase are allowed to basically update and converse with the architect. The government tenders and the freelance projects never actually go into the platform in terms of a place where you can work on the project. Doesn't really make sense at this point. So the idea is, of course, you can export a proposal, send it to your government contractor. We can export a proposal and submit that to the Upwork people and invite them to potentially collaborate on our platform. But there is no way to integrate with every government municipality that's publishing a bunch of different projects. You can go on the website. I don't know, don't convert because it's just more shit that I have to delete. Is this a real person? Like, we got 10 leads today. But the idea is if you go to the platform, we're basically asking for a little bit of upfront information, ArchitectureQuote.com, get a bunch of upfront information, and I'm giving people something that most people don't give, which is a rough estimate. So I'll show that in the next slide, but the idea is you get a rough upfront estimate, so at least you know in a ballpark figure how much you would stand to reason to spend. The idea is this is a psychology principle of anchoring. If you have a estimation of a price, it allows you to get a little closer to that, or at least have an understanding. You go into working with an architect and you're like, it's gonna be like $200, right? I mean, like, the guy's a fucking artist. Like, how much can it be? No. Like this is like hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. So you need to make sure that you're meeting expectations by providing something in the way of an anchoring point. And integrations, we're starting our first integration with Slack. We already have it connected for at least the deal flow side. The idea is I want people to essentially talk inside the platform. So I realize that this is kind of a two-part MVP, but think of it like this. Architects use upwards of 7 different tools to communicate, which is just crazy to me. So anything in the way of like Google Drive, OneDrive, email, Slack, WhatsApp, and then there's like, a couple of different project management tools. It's too much. I want to have one place where everything's available. And the idea is if you reduce the amount of confusion, hopefully they'll save money and make more on margins. So the architect view. So the architects essentially go onto our website, sign up as an architect, they put in their information, they go into the platform. There is an email between here that basically gives them a login ID and allows them to basically create a password. They immediately go into the platform and see this is government tenders, this is the freelance projects. The idea is they're basically given a view of the 3 different areas. Again, that's tenders, freelance, and organic projects where they can look through and search and filter and see if anything is of interest to them and immediately start working on it. This is the user view. So somebody gets on our website, they select the type of project. So it's new construction, then it goes into the type. So maybe it's interior design or it's green villa or whatever. They complete all the additional information, tell us basically the size of the project and a few other details. They get an email that gives them that estimate. So there's the estimate. And then we basically say, all right, start now. The idea of start now is basically trying to see if people are just getting pricing for the sake of getting pricing or if they're actually serious. They go into the platform, they create a new password, and then they get the second set of basically forms, which ask the most important questions, which basically are allowing me to lead score these. So give these a score between 1 and 10. 1 being this is not really a good lead and probably bullshit, and 10 meaning these people are ready to buy. And one of the most important questions you can ask is, do you have the money? Right? Do you have can you afford this, or is this just like, I feel like I'd like to have a palace? Yeah. Do you have the money, and when would you like to build this? A lot of projects start right away. It's a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, and these things are actually off to the races in terms of actually architects starting the work. So they go very quickly. And that's the idea is I'm trying to validate inside the platform. Once they do that, that's the bottom right. They're inside, they can see their project in there. They can create multiple projects. I'd preferred that we didn't go into that too much because it's almost nonsensical. Most people aren't going to have multiple projects, but it is what it is. Last little bit in terms of the collaborations, this is what's coming in the future on the left in terms of integrating with WhatsApp, Slack, Google Drive, and all these things so that nobody loses anything. And then the exporting proposal is basically finished. The idea is that I want people to win more contracts by applying to more contracts. So the idea is that if you have 50 government tenders and on average you only submit 1 contract per month, you are wasting your fucking time. If you submit 50 really good proposals that are almost auto-generated, then you stand to make a lot more money because you might end up winning 30% of those 50 rather than 0% of 1. So the idea is I'm trying to facilitate a faster application process to win more larger contracts, essentially scale your business faster. Whew. So we're getting to the bottom. This is kind of what's needed. So I played some games. Lemlist is one of my favorite outreach tools. This was kind of the first iteration of it. Just pretend that isn't there. So one of the fun things about Lemlist is it allows you to use merge fields. So you put a picture of you going like this on a blackboard, and then in handwriting font, ArchitectureQuote, or your company and is awesome because we love you, or you're really smart and architects in your company are brilliant and we love your work. You'd be surprised how many fucking people thought I got on a board and wrote their name, their company, and they're awesome. And you actually get responses out of that. Like, it totally works. Lemlist, it has a 14-day free trial. It is baller. It's so good. So we use this for a mixture of investor outreach. So basically saying Keystones or Danban or Investor Fight Club, all these different investor networks in Denmark. We want funding. And they were like, go fuck yourself. So that's fine. But the idea is I'm looking for more international players that tend to work on this pre-seed area. Pre-seed means basically no round A yet. Pre-seed is basically companies that are at 0 up to 10,000 MRR dollars. Location agnostic means they'll actually invest in people anywhere. I've talked to a lot of folks out in Estonia. I don't know where that money comes from, but they want me to move there, and I ain't doing that. And yeah, again, it's like European and global networks. So I'm totally down for looking at lists of this stuff. Bear in mind that this is how Valuer operates. So I've used a lot of internal resources within Valuer to basically research a ton of this stuff. So it's not a heavy need, but I think it would be a lot of fun to basically create a few lists of the investors that have worked with minimum viable product companies like mine with only a few customers that are willing to invest on something like what I got. Customers. So customers is like the important part, right? That's what pays the bills. So we already do a lot of scraping. Not that kind of scraping, but has anybody ever used like WebScraper.io or like a scraping platform? Like it's the shit. It's one of those things that takes away all the manual work. If you ever want to get good at marketing, you need to understand some really basic scraping like Chrome extensions. So write down WebScraper.io. I promise you, if you get good at that, you'll have a job. But the idea is essentially we've scraped this website, which basically listed something like 150 architects. And this website, which scraped, we grabbed 485 architects that are all local at Copenhagen. And also, there's a couple of more shady ways of getting this information. Based on their CVR number and what they've registered with the government, I can find out what service they're offering. So if they registered as an architect or an architect services company, I've scraped every company within Denmark within the last 2 years that's registered that. So I'm not really hurting for that, but I think it's really interesting to get some of the more well-known local players that actually have websites that are out there trying to move and hustle. This was one of the guys' websites that I showed that actually didn't work. So just be aware of that. But the idea is the small to medium-sized players, it's really difficult to find companies that are open-minded to expansion and are definitely like this growth-minded type of company. So I'm meeting with my second client on Friday, a company called Novaform, and it's basically a formality. We're in. So the idea is I'm looking for people that have a desire to grow very quickly. And there's a lot of architecture firms that aren't that. So I don't know how you search for that. I don't know how you figure that out. I think a lot of people that are doing a lot of leadership talks or a lot of companies that are putting out a ton of content probably have a bit more of a knack for how to grow. I am asking for partnerships, meaning I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I'm looking for monthly subscribers, obviously, and feedback sessions from these folks. So collaborators are the big one. The idea is this kind of gets at everything that I've shown earlier. Really difficult to find those people because it's finding somebody that's willing to take a chance. So I've already reached out to Pearson Ingalls, and they're like, yeah, we'll maybe talk about it another time, reach back in 6 months. I reached out to Henning Larson, no answer. I reached out to 3XN, and the CEO was like, yeah, cool, send me some information. I did, and didn't respond, so that's how that goes. Industry publishers are kind of an unknown area that a lot of people don't realize. If you get in good with an old school publisher and basically say, look, you guys still do magazines? They're like, yeah, magazines, print. It's like, cool, so you guys are fucked. I'm telling you right now, if you don't do something different with your business models, you will lose. Guess what I got? I got something for you, and I need an industry partner that can help me connect with the major players in terms of clients. I will even give you a cut if you're willing to collaborate with me. I'm not giving it away, but as an industry partner, you get this, this, and this, and that is your collaborative industry publisher partner from me. I expect you to write a fuck ton of stuff about me because that's how we give and take. And you'd be surprised how well this works. So I need a ton of publishers and a ton of these large partners, the largest firms in all of Europe that are interested in AEC, architecture, and innovation within architecture. And again, I'm asking for resources. On rare occasions, I'll give investment, but a lot of time it's PR and that kind of stuff. And you'd be surprised how well that works. It's just a matter of asking. And the research. This is sometimes the hardest part, and I think this is probably a big focal point, as Stefan has noted. The idea of an industry analysis and an in-depth kind of look at everything happening within the industry, trends, a lot of the questions that I put down here on the bottom right. I've already created my own survey and found out a lot of interesting information. I think it would be cool to give you guys a chance to do your own version of it and not just carbon copy mine to see what you think is the most relevant. But what I'm trying to get at is figure out whether or not they're interested in buying my service via a questionnaire. So the idea is like, where do you get your new leads from? And give them the option of saying, oh, word of mouth. And it's like, cool, you're an idiot. Next one. How many paid projects does your firm deliver per year? If it's 2, it's like, damn, dude, like, lucky I found you. Because what happens if one of those falls out? Or what happens if you do 4 projects this year? Wouldn't you like a little more money? They're like, maybe. On average, how much do you pay per new lead? This is a multifold question. The idea is, if they say, nothing, I don't pay for leads, then it's like, okay, that's going to be a little harder. Or if they say, I pay $1,000 per lead, it's like, cool, I don't even charge that. My model is really cheap right now. I'm looking at a subscription model of basically $199 a month. That's it. So the next question, what is the average cost or total you charge to a client of your services? This gives me a better understanding of how much they're actually making in terms of margins. So the average margin for architecture services is between 40 and sometimes 50%. So they always bill way more in order to make a shitload of money. The more expensive the project, the less margin they can make. But if we're talking about a project that's under $100,000, generally you're looking at a 30% to 40% markup. On average, how many proposals does your firm send out per month? This is trying to get at, wouldn't you like to send out 15, 20, 100 proposals per month rather than 2 or 0? And the idea is, if you close more of these proposals, you could grow your company. How likely would you be to pay for a monthly subscription to a platform that sends you new competitions and leads? That's one of the most important things, and it's what I fucked up on when I built Gluten-Free VIP. I was asking people the wrong question. So when I was doing a lot of user interviews, or basically user testing, I would show them the platform, and my question was really simple. I'd ask them, would you use this? And they're like, yeah, I mean, it seems cool, like it's functional, it works. And I'm like, okay, would you actually use this? And I'm like, no fucking way, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, you know? So when you change the verbiage, sometimes it makes an entire difference to the line of questioning. And the last little bit is the team. So I do work with a lot of different people, a lot of interns, and yeah, the idea is at the very top right is James the architect. These 3 guys are my full stack developers. That's my blue face in the middle. This is Veselin, the UX designer, and this is different shots of our team and different people that have worked with us in the office. That was the DTU round robin event. This was one of the founders pitching over at Tech Barbecue. I didn't want to piss off my founders when I was over at Valuer, so I was like, yeah, I'll wait this one out. And the kid had never pitched in front of an audience before, and his legs were shaking. But after he got off stage, he's like, that was the coolest thing ever. And he's like this super quiet, shy guy merchant. Love him to death. Yeah, so that is Architecture Quote. I think that's it for me.